You know that one person that just needs to do one simple thing to fix literally everything in their life, and you can see it, everybody they know can see it, but for whatever reason, they just don't do it. They can't bring themselves to. That's Paris in a nutshell. Hello and welcome back. We're continuing through the great books of Western civilization by reading the Iliad, Book 3. As usual, I'll read from the Robert Fagles translation. During a skirmish between the Greeks and the Trojans, Menelaus spots Paris on the front lines and tries to attack him. Paris retreats, hiding within the Trojan ranks. Hector, Paris's brother and leader of the Trojan armies, as well as their best fighter, berates Paris openly for being a cowardly adulterer who apparently has no courage at all for battle. He even wishes aloud that Paris had died long ago, thus sparing the Trojan people a lot of death and suffering. Paris takes this criticism in stride and suggests that he redeem himself in his brother's eyes by dueling Menelaus one-on-one, while the rest of the armies take their armor off, sit, and watch. The winner will take Helen and all of her treasures for good. The loser will die. But the war will end regardless of the outcome. Hector agrees to this gladly and raises his spear to get the attention of both armies in order to negotiate a truce for the duel. The Trojans and Greeks both agree to an end to the war based on the results of the duel, with one small addition. The Trojans must pay back the Greeks in gold and riches for all the suffering and death they've experienced for having to come here to get Helen. As the two warriors prepare for battle, Priam has Helen name all of the Greek captains and heroes that she sees on the field so that Priam can know who they are. This includes Odysseus, Agamemnon, Menelaus, and great Ajax. A messenger then summons King Priam to come out to the field and sacrifice to the gods alongside King Agamemnon in order to bless the truce and the duel. Priam, unable to bear staying and watching his son fight Menelaus to the death, retreats to the top of the wall to watch from afar. Helen joins him there. The fight between the two warriors is very short. Menelaus wins, in essence, when he gets a hold of Paris's helmet, pulls him to the ground, and starts to drag him through the Argive ranks. However, Aphrodite whisks Paris away, hiding him from sight and putting him in his bedroom in the castle in Troy. Aphrodite, goddess of love, then appears to Helen in disguise and tries to convince her to go and see Paris in his room. Helen is unwilling and resists and even insults the goddess. Aphrodite then threatens her with severe punishment, forcing her to submit. Once Helen has arrived in Paris's bedroom, she begins to insult and berate him for all the same things that Hector was. She wishes aloud that Paris, or herself, or both, were dead, that they had never run away together, and that she had never left Menelaus and their child together. Just like with Hector, Paris takes all of the critiques in stride, brushing off his failures, insisting they don't need to be paid attention to, and instead says that they should lose themselves in love. Helen complies. Meanwhile, Menelaus searches up and down the battlefield, looking for Paris. He doesn't find him, hiding among the Trojans, or lost among the Greek ranks either. Agamemnon then demands that the Trojans give up Helen and all of her treasures. After all, Paris, whether dead or alive, has clearly lost. This is really our first introduction to Paris as a character, what his actual personality is like, his behavior, etc., and we see that he is reprimanded repeatedly by those who he would expect to be most accepting and close to him, Helen and Hector. They wish aloud that he was dead, they call him a coward and adulterer for being somebody who refuses to fight while all others risk their hide and die and suffer for his mistake. Meanwhile, he appears completely unmoved, and while he always seems to be willing to promise to do better, he never quite rises to the occasion. Take the duel just as an example. Even after Aphrodite rescued him, he could have come out of his chamber, come right out to the wall or to the battlefield and said, "Hey guys, sorry, I got taken away. Let's do a rematch." Or even better, "I surrender. Here's Helen." That way, the war could end without him having to die, which is something that we know the Greeks are okay with because of how Agamemnon asks that the Trojans honor their end of the deal, even though Paris is nowhere to be found. But he doesn't. Instead, he stays in his rooms for hours, even after making love with Helen. We know this from Book 6, so I'm jumping ahead a little bit here. Aphrodite says to Helen, probably meaning it as a compliment, that he doesn't look like he's just come from fighting a man or from the battlefield. He looks like he's off to a dance. But in context, this is just as strong of an indictment as any against his moral character. He doesn't look like he's come from fighting because he's really not fighting. By and large, he lets others do it for him. And that's what's so infuriating about him. For Hector, for Helen, and for all the other Trojan men as well. That's another thing that's important to note. The Trojans don't like him any more than Hector or Helen do. If he was hiding among them after the duel when Menelaus was searching for him, the Trojans would have given him up in an instant. Paris has brought them nothing but grief. And it's not that Paris is weak or not a great warrior or something. He is, and in the past he's shown himself to be very brave. Hector says here, "Is this the man who mustered the oarsmen once, who braved the seas in his racing deep-sea ships, trafficked with outlanders, carried off a woman far from her distant shores, a great beauty wed to a land of rugged spearmen," referring, of course, to how Paris kidnapped Helen right out under Menelaus' nose, in the heart of Argos, Sparta, by the way. And then later, he says, "How could anyone fair and just underrate your work in battle? You're a good soldier, but you hang back of your own accord and refuse to fight. That's why the heart inside me aches when I hear our Trojans heap contempt on you, the men who bear such struggles, all for you." Despite what he said about wishing Paris were dead for the sake of the city, Hector does love his brother, and he wishes that he would just choose to be brave and strong like he used to be, like he knows that he can be. But for whatever reason, he just won't. Paris attempts to justify himself by claiming that the gifts of the goddess Aphrodite, such as musical skill, sex appeal, charm, good looks, are not to be tossed aside or scorned, as Hector seems to think that they should be. This is also our first look at Helen. She is referred to as a goddess by all who look on her, and as Bernard Knox points out, she's one of two human beings in the Iliad that appear to have this godlike power, nature, to themselves and to their actions. He writes, "In her own element, she is irresistible. As powerful as Achilles is on the battlefield, so Helen is in charm, allure, and influence." Knox argues that this godlikeness shows itself in her attitudes as well, particularly those of her actions before the novel. He writes, "When Paris came to visit, she ran off with him without a thought to the consequences for others, all the deaths at Troy. She acted like a god, with no thought of anything but the fulfillment of her own desire. And this reigns true the more and more we see of the gods and goddesses and their behavior. They tend to just do whatever pleases them, fulfill their own desires without any real regard for how the mortals will be affected." This interpretation of Helen relies on her having gone with Paris willingly, however, which, as I've said before, I find somewhat uncertain. You could really interpret it either way. In any case, that's not who she is now. Here in Book 3, we see her very down on herself. She calls herself a whore repeatedly. She wishes aloud that she were dead, that she had died long ago before any of this had happened. She takes a lot of responsibility and feels a lot of guilt for all of the suffering at Troy. And at one point in Book 3, she even feels a strong yearning to go home to Menelaus and her child. Out of all the characters in the Iliad, she's the one that has the most awareness of how she affects other people around her. All of this regret shows in her words and her actions. Though she goes to Paris once Aphrodite threatens her, she clearly does not want to be here or doing what she's doing. If it was a godlike attitude that was shown through her uncaring and callousness before, now this Helen seems to show her humanity through her guilt, responsibility for her actions, and pity that she shows to all those around her. This is our first time meeting King Priam as well. His interactions reveal a lot about him too. While he appears to be a good king, a noble man, and a loving father, he also seems to be faint of heart and blind to the suffering of people around him. For example, Priam calls Helen "my dear child" and tells her that he holds the gods to blame rather than her for all that has happened, which is noble by any standard, especially seeing how he's lost several sons in this war. Perhaps because of this, he's also blind to the suffering and blame that she puts on herself. Helen says to Priam, "If only death had pleased me then, that day I followed your son to Troy. Death never came, so now I can only waste away in tears, whore that I am." Her voice broke, but the old king, lost in wonder, cried out, "How lucky you are, Agamemnon! Look at the vast armies you command." He's totally blind to what she's saying. Furthermore, he's not able to stay on the battlefield while Paris duels Menelaus, which may be understandable, especially from our perspective. However, in this context, as the king of the city who's defending it from these rugged spearmen, as they've been called, who are bent on razing the city and making off with everything inside, whether it be women or riches, facts that we've established before, and killing everyone else, it's a little too faint-hearted to inspire confidence. Which is why Knox says, I think correctly, that the real burden of the city's defense rests on Hector. Not Paris, not Priam, just Hector, really. Hector, however, is someone that we're going to discuss in more detail in Book 6. Book 3, I think, ends on a tragic note for those of us that know the backstory already and know what really has to happen. Paris has disappeared, and the Greeks appear willing to honor the agreement even without his death, and yet we already know that the will of Zeus, that is, the will of Achilles, will not let the war end yet. His honor has not been restored, so we know that one way or another, this truce is going to erupt in war. Thanks for watching. Please like this video if you enjoyed it or learned something new, and comment below and let me know what it was. Or if there's something that you know about this book that I didn't cover, please mention that as well.